Blog Talk Radio.
Good evening, everyone. Stephen Lewis here from The Injured Psychic. Tonight's topic for Metaphysical Media Group is the recent shooting of Michael Brown. A terrible, terrible event by any account, and something that has precipitated rather a domestic crisis in America. It's certainly nothing that we haven't seen before. And this is what got my attention, the cyclical nature, the rhythm of these sorts of events. And tonight we're going to discuss the astrology behind the events of August the 9th in Ferguson, Missouri. Tonight I do have with me my good friend Steve Frampton. I do believe he will be here soon. As always, Skype is perhaps challenging us. Steve, are you there yet, or is Skype going to let you join us tonight to talk about this? Maybe he's got his microphone on mute. We'll try Steve back again later. But we do have an event chart that we're going to use.
I'm sorry. I am sorry.
He's there. All right. Hey, Steve, how's it going, man?
I'm sorry.
Don't be sorry.
I'm doing well.
You're doing. That's awesome. Well, you obviously know what's on the agenda tonight. A very, very serious and sober topic. We're going to look at. We're going to look into
serious stuff.
We're going to look into the rhythm of institutional and individual racism in the United States of America. So shall we go ahead and examine the chart for the event, Steve?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Good idea.
We quibbled a little bit. We talked about the time of it. As always, it's hard to say what time did it start. We settled on the time of 5 minutes after noon on the 9th of August 2014 in Ferguson, Missouri. Right, Steve? So what strikes you about this chart, Steve?
Well, the first thing that strikes me is that the two malefics, the minor malefic Mars and the major malefic Saturn, both in Scorpio, which is the sign of the zodiac ordinarily ruling the house of death, and they are together in the first house of the chart. So because they're angular on the one hand, Mars is in its own sign, and they're clustered there in the first. I think that's indicative of some form of tragedy. Yeah. But the other thing, Stephen, in my mind, is having the nodes of the lunar nodes on the ascendant and descendant. That's a very powerful dynamic, because I always consider that line, that horizontal line of the chart, to be an extremely powerful line in the chart, or in the astral representation of the event. So it's pretty clear as soon as you look at the chart and just observe that we've got the nodes on the descendant and the ascendant, and then Saturn and Mars together in Scorpio, that this is a problematic event, to say the least.
Yeah, Mars, to have Mars rising is always difficult. It always predisposes one or the environment to accident, violence, crime, and quite ironically, the big criminal here tonight is the dude toting the gun. And now with Mars conjuncting Saturn. You're quite right in judging this as severe, as solemn. Saturn, as far as I'm concerned, is what's responsible for killing Michael Brown. In other words, to my thinking, Saturn in Scorpio is a picture, a symbol of the policeman. What's his name? Darren
Wilson. Yeah, Darren Wilson.
Darren Wilson.
We've only recently discovered the name of the cop. That name wasn't originally released, but it has been now, Darren Wilson, as you said.
Right. Now, bearing in mind that we're talking about this before before there's been any trial. But if past patterns have held true, what's the point in having a trial? You know what I'm saying? It didn't really help too much the last time with George Zimmerman. And we'll look at that case as well, everyone, because they definitely bear comparison. They are the Trayvon Martin murder, even though I shouldn't call it that technically, because according to the state of Florida, well, what would Florida call it anyway? The Trayvon Martin tragedy.
Another day.
Yeah, maybe business as usual. Apparently, the Trayvon Martin tragedy and the Michael Brown tragedy are both cut from the same astrological cloth. I want people to be very aware of that, especially if they were hoping that this problem would eventually go away or would eventually resolve itself or morph into something more palatable. Well, it won't. It's sort of baked into the spiritual fabric of this nation, and it's going to resurge. It's going to come back periodically, rhythmically, cyclically. And unless, of course, we as a society step in and exert some control over this, some direction and some awareness over this. So it's going to, part of what we'll do here tonight, Steve, is speculate, looking at this symbolism as to, what's going to happen, how all of this might turn out. Already we've been seeing some civil disturbances, both peaceful and the opposite of peaceful. And, there's the idea here that the police are really escalating the reaction of the protesters. And
it's just a dreadful event. And I don't know, maybe we need a new law that makes it really clear that it's not okay to just murder a black man in the middle of the street. I mean, I have to say, the fact that there's this video footage as well of apparently of Michael Brown stealing a pack of cigarettes, and I know a long time ago it was acceptable to murder a black man for stealing a pack of cigarettes, but this is 2014, and the other thing is, Stephen, this video footage was released by the police, but they say that they had no choice because of the Freedom of Information Act, but it's completely unrelated. It has nothing to do with the murder of Michael Brown, because the police officer, Darren Wilson, who shot Michael Brown, knew nothing about that packet of cigarettes. And, I don't care if he just turned over a whole Best Buy, you don't shoot people. And I think the police are too trigger-happy in the United States. They're overly militarized. And I'm not being negative about the U.S., I'm just being honest. I live here, I love the U.S., but the police are overly militarized. And this is a dreadful, shameful event. The murder of an 18-year-old kid who had his whole life ahead of him, and I think it's absolutely appropriate that there are demonstrations. What I don't think is appropriate is firing the demonstrators with plastic bullets just because they were told by the police that they could only express their disgust during the daytime. But I go back to my point, Stephen, that the officer, Darren Wilson, apparently did not know anything about the cigarette incident. And even if he had, I think it's completely irrelevant. This is a young guy murdered by a police officer on the street of his hometown.
Yeah, looking at first of all, looking at the chart for the event where Michael Brown was slaughtered in broad daylight by a person he should have trusted.
What happened to I thought the police were supposed to protect us, not mow us down.
I'll tell you my opinion on this, looking at the chart here. My opinion on this is that, I want to be careful and not really do a blanket indictment of law enforcement. I think this is a departmental problem with the Ferguson Police Department, because I'll tell you something.
I know, but Stephen, I beg to differ, because this happens. This is not the only town in which this kind of brutality has occurred. I live in Knoxville, Tennessee, and there was a kid, a white kid actually, he was at one sort of a boozy party in the street with a load of other university students, and he was the police officer was sort of strangling him in the street, and there was a big uproar about that.
I saw the video for that. That was terrible.
I mean, he was white, so fortunately he just got strangled a bit.
Well,
he didn't get shot. But this issue of police brutality, of murder, and of black people, unfortunately, it is cropping up all over the U.S. So I agree with you. It's not everywhere, and I'm sure I've interacted with police officers that are wonderful, very professional, but this is not just isolated to Ferguson, Missouri.
Well, see, no, it's definitely not. I mean, I wouldn't even say that police brutality is cropping up all over the place. I mean, it's cropping up implies that it went away. you know, it never did. What I'm saying, however, is that, for example, look at how. And
Stephen, I'm not having to go at you. I'm just being.
No, I understand.
I'm being deliberately polemical.
It's fine. But look how the law enforcement apparatus seems to have asserted itself in Missouri now, because it seems to me, for example, the governor is bringing in other sort of taking away the jurisdiction of Ferguson, Missouri, from the Ferguson Police Department. Essentially, the governor of the state of Missouri has said, Ferguson Police Department, you're relieved of command. Now the highway patrol or the state police are running it now.
Yes. My opinion in Knoxville, Stephen, when this kid was being choked by a police officer, was the chief of police should be ousted, because if it happens on your watch, you're the most senior person. You should be out.
That's what I mean when I say that there's something wrong with the Ferguson PD. It's possible. I'm not saying it's the truth, but it's possible you could travel 50 miles up the road and maybe you'll find a different town and there'll be a different character of the police department. The police departments in America aren't necessarily knit together and woven together. They have their own personal geographic character. So for example, next door in St. Louis, you might expect or hope that the police department is certainly more friendly to minorities. And
you only get shot if you took a case of whiskey.
Oh no, you only get shot if you're Mexican.
The police officer that shot you knew nothing about the fact that you just stolen a case of whiskey anyway.
See, this just proves you're just completely wrong. No, you only get shot in St. Louis if you're Mexican. Okay, if you're black,
okay.
Yeah, if you're black, you get tased, and then maybe maced. It depends on the offense. Now,
there was a kid get tased as well. Now there was a little girl that was tased.
Yeah. Well, one thing I want to
7 something that was last week.
I want to point out something here. Look at comparing the event chart for the Michael Brown shooting with the event chart for the Trayvon Martin shooting in February 26th, and that happened at 7:09 in Sanford, Florida. In both those charts, the planet Mercury rules perception is in terrible condition. In my ground chart, Mercury is conjunct the sun; it's combust. And in Trayvon Martin's chart, Mercury is in Pisces, the sign of his fall. Steve, I argue that this represents the manipulation of these young men's reputations and images in order to, maybe make the cops look better, or just to detract from the pressure of the problem overall. But
I think that I agree with you, and it is a really close conjunction. It is combust. I think that unfortunately that indicates getting to the truth is going to be very difficult in this situation, and I'd really like your suggestion that ultimately we consider how this might play out in the justice or lack of justice system, but I think that Mercury combusted says that it's going to be very difficult to actually get the truth here.
Yeah, the perception of the event is going to be skewed somehow. Being so close to the sun is a serious affliction for Mercury, or in fact any other planet. The ancient thinking on this matter was that the sun will swallow up things that get close. Now, the only region where Mercury or any planet is safe in proximity to the sun is within 17 minutes of exactitude. Within that small 17-minute range, then we say the planet is Kazemi, and then it's in the very heart of the king, is how the ancient texts describe it. It's special, it's elevated, but other than that, it's afflicted, and that's what we have here. It's afflicted. So Michael Brown's reputation is going to get dragged through the mud, and people are going to lose sight of the fact, perhaps, that hey, when they were 18, they did really stupid stuff, and they were forgiven for it.
But it comes down. I think though that it has to come back to some real basics, just to keep it simple. 18-year-old black guy, unarmed, shot several times to his death by a white police officer when he actually had his hands raised and was trying to get away. I think it's as simple, in my mind, it's as simple as that. I don't care what he did the day before. I don't care if he was mouthy. He was unarmed, and he was trying to get away. And he was shot. He was killed. He was murdered. I think it's as simple as that.
I think for most of us, if we could put ourselves in that police officer's shoes, even if we could experience his anger or frustration, I think at that moment, when Michael Brown raised up his hands, I think the majority of us would sort of come to our senses, put down the weapon, and reach out a hand to help the guy out and say, oh my God, I'm sorry, I'm going to face the consequences for this, but I'm prepared to do that. And you know what I'm saying? But he didn't. Now, this guy, think about, what I'm seeing here with this cop, Mars conjunct Saturn. As far as I'm concerned, this describes the police officer. This describes Darren. This is giving us information into his internal dynamics. Scorpio. Let's examine the sign it's in. Scorpio is renowned for vengeance. Now, with other aspects of this chart that are keyed up here and highlighted, there's a definite racist element or racism that's at play here. I know that might seem obvious, but astrologically, with Venus at 26 degrees of Cancer, she has come back to the sign she occupied in America's birth figure, and in earlier shows regarding the American natal chart, and in all shows here, I'm going to make the case that Venus in Cancer is a symbol for racism, American racism. And note here, now this is note here Venus has returned to Cancer. That's a symbol of racism. We have Mars and Saturn rising. That's a symbol that something terrible is going to happen. And then we have the grouping of planets in Leo, Mercury, the Sun, and Jupiter. That's also highly significant, angular in the 10th house. So all of these factors converging say that, hey, there's going to be a racist event happening in Ferguson, Missouri. Now, if that weren't enough, if using the whole sign house system, the American 6th house is in the 7th house of the event chart. Now, what does that mean? That means that this event in that place was stimulating the 6th house of slavery in the United States natal figure. This means, in other words, for lack of a better term, slavery issues were coming to the forefront here. So highlighting the 6th house, and I'll go ahead and let the cat out of the bag, and examining the charts for a wide range of racist police brutality, we see the American 6th house highlighted. And so it confirms that there's an institutional racism at work here, whether we like to admit it or not, as a society.
I agree. Looking at the chart for the event, Stephen, it's a massively discordant chart. So we've talked on previous shows about measuring the overall.
Still with us, Steve? Uh-oh. Houston, we may have a problem.
Sorry, no, I had a problem with Skype, but I'm back. We were talked before about measuring the overall harmony or discord in charts, and this event chart for the Ferguson shooting is incredibly discordant. I mean, it's hard to find any harmony in it, to be honest with you. It's a really, really bad chart.
Yeah, it is, and it tells a really, really bad story as well. We've talked about the Mercury already, how in what bad shape he's in, but when you factor in the idea that he rules the 8th house of death, things take on and the 12th house, things take on a much more grim tone.
Yeah. The other thing is that the moon is the most powerful planet.
That's very interesting. especially the sign placement. Aquarius is so humanitarian, isn't it? Aquarius is the sign of equal rights, isn't it? That's so amazing. And here the moon is the people, the common people, angular, at full power.
Yeah. And it's massively discordant, Stephen. So in terms of discordines, it's 52. That's extremely high. So just that discordant power in the moon in Aquarius in this chart suggested that something very unfortunate for the general public would occur, or for a member of the general public. And then when you look at the aspects to the moon, it's under enormous pressure. The moon opposes the midheaven, which is another PowerPoint in the chart. It squares and parallels Mars, the planet of shooting. It squares the ascendant, and it's opposed by Venus, and Venus is the planet in this chart that rules the house of death. It's also parallel Saturn. So it would be hard to find a chart that has a more discordant and more challenged moon. And again, the moon is the common people.
Now, as a symbol for protesters, would you say that the moon, as the common people, would you say that moon is going to get more peaceful or perhaps more violent in its manifestation and protests in the coming days?
In the coming days, I would say because the moon is so powerful, the general public are going to play a very prominent role in this situation. So I would say they're going to continue to express their outrage, and because the moon is extremely discordant, I would say also that that's an indicator that there could well be more rioting, more problems. And the other thing is that Saturn, which we would say, generally speaking, was the police, the authorities.
Right.
Saturn is very prominent in the chart, and Saturn is extremely discordant as well. So to me, it almost indicates that there'll continue to be enormous tension between the police and the general public in Ferguson.
I 100% agree with you on that, because I'll tell you what, that moon in Aquarius is ruled by Saturn. And so, to me, this really tells the narrative of what's been going on in Ferguson. First of all, the police are going to create the moon. In other words, Officer Darren is going to shoot Michael Brown, and this is going to cause the moon in Aquarius to come into existence. The moon in Aquarius, in the fourth house, and the dynamics that you just mentioned in opposition to the midheaven, etc., they're going to protest, and they're going to be pretty antsy about it. And then, because they're going to cause Saturn to exist again, because the rulership of a planet is circular. In other words, the police action, the shooting, caused the moon to exist, the protests, and then the protests in turn caused the police response to come into existence, Mars and Saturn. And, the behavior of the riot police is a pretty good match to Mars and Saturn. And it also, being in Scorpio, brings up the notion that the line of riot police from Ferguson, Missouri, their SWAT teams, there could also be a vengeful, sort of scared and hyper-defensive quality to their behavior, and that's another reason why they should be recused from the responsibility of policing over Ferguson, Missouri, for the time being. Now, I would also agree that the demonstrations themselves are going to become more animated and perhaps even violent, because the moon is applying to a square with Mars. You see, a lot of ancient authors would have said that sort of configuration would herald all sorts of awful, god-awful things. My opinion, it's probably going to represent the public getting a lot more enthusiastic about this.
I would agree. And it's interesting to look at the elements of fire, earth, air, and water to begin with, because this is a very fiery chart. So this police officer fired upon him, and the police, or the riot police, were firing with rubber bullets and etc. upon the demonstrators, the general public, including journalists. But the chart is 42% fire. So when you consider we've got four elements, to find that one element represents 42% is very significant, but it's also very discordant. And the other thing that's interesting, Stephen, is the most highly discordant element in the chart is the element of air. And again, I'm talking about the event chart. So air represents all thoughts and decisions. So when you've got a significant amount of air that's extremely discordant, it's basically astrological shorthand for bad decision, bad choice. Right. Which is exactly what we've seen here. And then we've got a good dose of water in the chart that's extremely discordant. So people are really angry, emotions are running high, and that's another reason why I feel we'll continue to see real outrage and disgust amongst the general public about this murder. And then there's very little earth in this chart. It's only 8.5% earth. So structures and pragmatism, etc., groundedness, all of these things are pretty much out the window.
Right, I know. And unfortunately, you mentioned having the element of air to be so troubled in this chart. Unfortunately, concepts of justice and fairness, these and the government itself, the ideas of the government, these all belong to the air element too. So the that's a match for the unfair, the arbitrary and impromptu administration of justice. So it's really, really unfortunate that has happened, but perhaps not so unpredictable. I feel pretty strongly that these are expressions of a larger cycle between Jupiter and Saturn that lasts about 20 years, and when it started in 2000, it was in the Earth sign of Taurus, and I think that's really the core of the conflict here in terms of what's causing this, what's responsible for this unacceptable rash of police brutality. The concept, the interplay of Jupiter in Taurus and Saturn in Taurus. Jupiter in Taurus is going to want to allow minorities and other perhaps oppressed peoples in America to partake of the capitalist system with equal enjoyment and vigor as their peers. The Saturn in Taurus is going to deny those things. Jupiter in Taurus is going to expand pleasure and money, and it's very liberating. Saturn is going to restrict. So that's the key idea of this cycle. And during the Trayvon Martin incident, Saturn and Jupiter were in significant configurations with each other, wired into this cycle. With the shooting with Michael Brown, it was the same thing. So what we're seeing here are the machinations of a larger cycle at work, the expression of a larger idea. And every time that the two elements in this idea, Jupiter and Saturn, freedom and constriction, every time these elements come within an aspect of each other, 90 degrees, 180 degrees, then it manifests as an event. The idea becomes real. It becomes flesh, as it were. The word becomes flesh. And so in this way we see astrology as a transmitter of the divine idea into the sublunary matter that we all work with every day. And it's unfortunate the way it happened, but being part of a cycle, you have to ask yourself, how much free will do we have here? There's a lot of karma involved in the events in Ferguson.
Well, it's a whole debate, a very interesting subject, isn't it? We know that we do have free will. We make choices every day. Decide, are you going to have a sandwich for lunch or are you going to have a salad? And we make choices about relationships and jobs, all manner of things. So we do have free will, but we know that the stellar influences are extremely powerful, and I do believe that there is an amount of fate involved in all situations in everyone's lives. So one person has good health, one person has bad health, one person is born into a family that struggles financially, another person is born as Queen of England. There is definitely an element of fate, because you just look, I'm I'm British, and not that that's good or bad, but I'm British. It's fated. There's nothing I can do about it. You think of your height. Well, that's fated. Yeah. So there is a very significant element of fate in my mind, but we do still have the free will to make choices, and unfortunately, Darren Wilson chose to murder Michael Brown. Interestingly, Stephen, in this chart, we've talked a little bit about that eclipse. The eclipses indicate potential trouble in the world and in all charts. Well, the eclipse in November that was 11 degrees Scorpio was activated by Mars. So Mars was at 8 degrees Scorpio on the day of this killing. So that eclipse is very much activated right now by Mars in Scorpio. So there'll be other events, not necessarily an event like this, but there'll be other problems, and we would see that by the triggering of that eclipse point. But this chart's an interesting one. The Ferguson chart's interesting. The ruler of the 8th house of death is Venus, and Venus is right up there at a pretty powerful point in the chart, the midheaven, or very powerful point, I should say, and it's squaring the nodal axis, so it spells trouble, and it's also the ruler of the north node on the ascendant in the chart.
It's wow. Sometimes you just get so swamped with ideas you don't know where to begin. I'm having that sort of a moment right now because, yeah, for sure, the interplay of free will and determination being determined by some outside entity, that's just such a fascinating question. And, looking at the narrative that's shown by Mars and Saturn in Scorpio, Mars very uncomfortably, significantly close to the eclipse point, which you're quite right to point out. Is this event tied to the eclipse? I would argue strenuously, yes, absolutely it is. In all the literature, you keep coming across this idea that eclipse events manifest after the actual eclipse, and that they can last. The effects can last for quite some time, even for like a year. But looking at the narrative here, Mars and Saturn as the police officer in Scorpio, this tells the story of a person who is seething on the inside. Saturn in an emotional water sign is not well placed there. The coldness is good. There's a certain coldness that is very good, but Saturn is dry. He'll contain the emotions of Scorpio. So here we have an emotional rejection that's seething inside of this police officer, and we drop Mars into that, which is going to instill the will to fight. Okay, so now we have a mental picture of what the officer's psychology was like that day. Now let's look at the squares between Mars and the Sun, and the Sun is conjunct. The Sun is very, very widely conjunct Jupiter. The Sun is very close to Jupiter. And so we see here that any expression of ego from Michael Brown would have triggered this extremely irascible and sensitive Mars-Saturn combo. So the officer would have woken up feeling out of sorts and ill that day, for sure, because of Mars approaching the eclipse degree. Okay, there's obviously, I guarantee you, if we had his precise birth chart, his chart would mirror this chart very strikingly. There'd be congruence between the two.
Well, we will at some point have his chart, so I think we'll need to revisit this dreadful incident and look at the synastry of it, Stephen, progress his chart now, and compare that with the event chart. But one thing I wanted to point out is that when you look at the chart for the town, Ferguson, Missouri, what's there smack bang at 11 degrees Scorpio, the exact eclipse point, Mercury, and Mercury was stationed in the Ferguson, Missouri natal chart. So a planet that's stationed is very prominent, very powerful. So there was no doubt that anybody, if they had a local astrologer that was looking at Ferguson's chart, they definitely would have predicted some significant event, some significant news in Missouri, because that natal Mercury at 11 degrees Scorpio stationed was absolutely triggered by Mars and the eclipse.
Yeah, that's a good
point, when a planet stations as it's about to turn retrograde or turn direct, it's very slow. It's considered to be slow. And Mercury is significant. It's a link to both the town chart and the actual event chart. I'd like to point out about that Mercury, and this is also very terrible, is that when you switch to the whole sign house system, Gemini becomes the eighth house, the eighth sign from the ascendant. When I use Alcibiades house cusps, Gemini happens to be on the ascendant, 0 degrees and 29 minutes. So the very, very beginning, it's a situation where if you switch from Placidus to Alcibiades, you'll have slightly different cusps. But the idea that this house system brings up is that Mercury is going to cause death by the expression of his ego, because Mercury is so close to the sun here. You know what I'm saying, Steve? So when Mercury expresses, it's going to be very very dramatic and flamboyant, and it's going to cause the eighth house to exist. You see, and the square between the Sun and Mars, between the Sun and Saturn, shows the conflict that Michael Brown, his personality, his essence, showed that conflict between the police officer. Now, I'm not saying all of this to excuse the officer, because I didn't ask him to become a cop. And when you're a cop, it doesn't matter if you woke up in a bad mood that day. You've got to behave a certain way when you discharge your duties, and most cops do. However,
are they not checked as well regularly? Are cops in the U.S. not screened regularly for mental stability or instability?
They are, but unfortunately, for example, there was a case in the Pacific Northwest where a man became a super cop. His dad was a cop, his brother was a cop, came from a long line of cops. It was just a given. He would become a cop too. Well, he flunked the psychological exam to get in. Well, guess what? Dad pulled some strings, got him onto the force. The dude became chief of police and wound up shooting himself and his wife later when his divorce ensued. So when he was having personal problems, he committed suicide and killed his wife. In other words, that police chief should never have been let onto the force, let alone become police chief. He failed the psychological entry exam, but he was able to game the system because of personal connections, which is not.
Was he white?
Well, yeah, he was white. I mean, this isn't the sole province of the police. And a lot of businesses, a lot of establishments you go to, there's an old boy network. You know what I mean? There's a lot of ways to circumvent equality practices or things of that nature in hiring. I'm pretty I have no clue what the racial makeup is of the Ferguson Police Department, but I'm pretty sure the racial makeup of the St. Louis Police Department is probably a lot more balanced and in favor of the demographics that are existing.
Well, I don't think they can have a PR advisor, because the announcement that was made about the release of this video footage of Michael Brown apparently Michael Brown in a store taking a packet of cigarettes, that announcement was by a white police officer, and in the background was a bunch of other male white police officers. So I don't know who their PR advisor is, or if they don't even have one. I would suspect they don't have one, but it just seems really insensitive, really silly to have this announcement and a bunch of white cops in shade standing behind the guy that's making the announcement.
Well, it kind of is what it is, I guess. Sometimes, considering the demographics of the region, for example, you might have someone make the critical observation that, such and such a police department in Missouri pulls over twice as many African Americans as Caucasians. Well, it could be that in that particular, and it turns out, in fact, that in that particular area there is an African American majority in that town. So, naturally they're going to pull over more African Americans. So, the statistics of imbalance, it's important to know them for one thing, and it's just, unfortunately, who's going to police the police? I think that's really the important question. And in certain areas, police departments are more racially mixed, and we don't have these problems. But in other areas we do. The police here in my town, they do their jobs, and they're They're very fun, and I'm not just saying that to get out of any parking tickets, because I know every member of the police force is listening. That's how popular we are. I'm not just saying that to get out of parking tickets. Every time I've been ticketed, I've walked away. But then again, I'm white. But we don't have a whole bunch of police brutality here. If any, there are good relations. My point is that there are good relations between the police department and the community. Not so in Ferguson, Missouri. There's obviously a problem there. The North Node is in the 12th house of the event chart, and so that right there says that a nasty secret's going to come out. And thank God for that. It should come out. It should come out. Now, wow, I'm not convinced. As far as like, I don't know. It's just the situation is still unfolding. I don't know who to. I'll be frank with you, Steve. I don't know, aside from the astrology, who or what to trust in this mess. My de facto default position in situations like this is to trust neither side, to take both sides with a grain of salt and make up my own mind once I'm capable of doing so, i.e. after some semblance of facts have been passed. I accept that they may not be real facts. I might have to take that into consideration, but at least I can work with them. You know what I'm saying? Right now, there's a paucity of stuff on the public record, but that's definitely going to change.
Well, this is the beauty of astrology. It does tell you the truth.
It definitely paints the full picture, and it paints the ramifications, the future of that picture.
There's no escape from the truth in astrology. That's one of the things I like about it, and people often say to me, well, where do you get your understanding of what's happening in the world? And well, first thing I say is not the U.S. media, generally speaking, although I do look at CNN and some other resources, but astrology provides excellent insight into the true dynamics, the truth.
Yes, it does.
I hope that we're able to get, at some point, Stephen, the birth details for Darren Wilson, the cop, and for Michael Brown, because you bet your bottom dollar that if you took their natal charts and progressed them and then overlaid the transits, you'd see the pinch points between their two charts. In other words, you'd see conjunctions between their two charts. Probably right. Wilson's Mars, natal or progressed, would conjunct a very significant point in Michael Brown's chart. Well,
we've entered a new season of the American legal code being tested. Around the time of the Trayvon Martin shooting, America had just experienced a Saturn return recently. And what that's going to do, it's going to test America to see how well it's integrated the Saturn principle into its governance, into its existence. And with the eruption of these episodes, Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, the episode in Charlotte where another unarmed man was shot, these episodes, these events, these tragedies, they're emblematic of what the Saturn principle for America means. And essentially what the Saturn return is saying is, hey, America, are you going to be fair in the way you dispense justice? And are you going to police fairly? Let's not forget, America's Saturn is in Libra. Are you going to police fairly? That's another very important question. And this, as Saturn,
for black people as well.
For all people combined. We have to. The thing about racism is that we tend to think it can go in one direction, and that's extremely dangerous. Studying the sweep of history, what you find inevitably is that there's a seesawing motion between oppressed and oppressor. Where the bottom rail comes to the top, then cycles back to the bottom again. So racism as a practice in general ought to be guarded against. So we should watch out for extreme nationalistic tendencies and all of the various subgroups that call America home, all the various types of groups and cultures that set up shop here in the home of the free and the land of the brave. But what disturbs me about this is the imposition of the police state, the militarization of the police, which we can talk about as we.
I find the police, honestly, as a Brit living in the States, I think the police are pretty damn scary in the U.S.
Well, I don't have culture shock for you.
It is. Right. It's a huge culture shock.
Yeah.
You in the UK, if the police stop you, they'll say, the first thing they'll say is, "Good afternoon, sir." They address you with respect, not like Darren Wilson, who said, "Get out the middle of the..." His opening comment apparently was get out the middle of the effing street.
Right, now that's
not a way to address somebody, a member of the public who, the public pay taxes to provide this service.
Now that's coming from Michael Brown's friend, who is quite lucky and fortunate to be alive, I might add, to have survived this incident. This is now, and I don't mean to, I'm not connected to these folks. I'm not connected to the police department either. I don't know who's telling me the truth. I don't know.
Well, I know, but let's face it. If you're capable of murdering a kid that wasn't armed, then you're definitely capable of saying, get out the middle of the effing street.
That's true. Any human being is capable of a great deal, Steve. Do I think that this police officer is a murderer? I do not. Even though he did commit murder, I don't think he's necessarily a killer. I don't think he's got a killer personality.
What is he?
He's a normal human being who lost it and made a terrible, tragic mistake, and he's got to face the consequences of that mistake. Do I think that he rolled up there and pulled out his Glock and was like, get up on the effing sidewalk? I don't believe that. Do I believe that Michael Brown reached into the car and grabbed the dude by the throat and called his mother or this and that and called him a dab of cat shit? I don't believe that either. No. I think probably something in the middle happened. And in fact, when you get down to it, in the absence of an official record, and a Ferguson, Missouri record is not what I would consider official. An official, unbiased record, in the absence of that, I can't for sure say that I know which side is right. Now, looking at the astrology, I can definitely see the guy being extremely angry. I can see him spouting curse words. But I'm thinking of this as a situation, Steve, that escalated, that started out at one level, at some base level, and obviously it escalated.
But you've got to come back to the point of the question: what justifies shooting an 18-year-old kid who's not even armed?
Well, first of all, in America, you do not touch a police officer if he interacts with you. That's just a no-no. You just do not do that.
Okay, but we don't know who did that, and even if it is a no-no, it just doesn't justify killing the person that did it.
Well, to be fair, we have to put ourselves into the officer's shoes as well. And when you're a police officer, you don't know if a person is armed or unarmed. This stuff comes out ex post facto. You don't know that at all. And if you lay your hands on a police officer, I don't care if you're black, white, yellow, tan, camouflage, you are going to get laid out. And you know what? You're going to deserve it. Because if you touch that police officer, he did they have rules of engagement. They are allowed to shoot you graveyard dead under certain circumstances. We cannot lose sight of that fact. In Britain, they're not allowed, they don't carry weapons.
So are they allowed to shoot you, even if he did touch the police officer? Does that entitle a police officer to kill him when he's running away?
If Darren comes out and says, I don't know his last name, if the officer comes out and says
Wilson.
Okay, if Officer Wilson comes out and says in court, I saw him reach behind him, I saw him reach into his back pocket, then that could be justification for...
But he'd already shot him once.
Well, there was a beginning to this. Yeah, he shot him multiple times. That part is going to be very hard for him to defend in court. That part is where I have no problem in saying a murder occurred or a crime occurred. How the scuffle happened, that's the gray area.
Well, the question, Stephen, in my mind is, why is the police officer was apparently put on leave?
Yeah.
But if you kill someone, should you get arrested, don't you?
This is protocol for police officers because normal people aren't in their job description tasked with the possibility of dealing lethal violence. Every police officer, or most police officers, are. And so it's protocol there are definite protocols that exist for when you're an officer. It doesn't matter if the bad guy is pointing an Uzi at you and you shoot him and kill him. You're still going to go on administrative leave. You're still going to have some time booked with the department psychologist, things of that sort. So the machinery takes over. Now, the question that I have is the entire department, the police department of Ferguson, Missouri, screwed up? And I'm inclined to think that probably it was. I definitely don't want to say that the officer did not pull up to the curb and was vulgar with the two gentlemen and was violent with the two young men. I'm not saying that either. Okay, I'm just trying to maintain maximum objectivity and keep, keep an open mind here as to what really happened. What I feel pretty confident happened is that Officer Wilson had a lethal and unacceptable, uncontrollable surge of homicidal temper at some point. Whether it was self-defense, the sign of Scorpio is self-defensive. I mean, anytime you investigate the sign of Scorpio, the term self-defense will come up over and over again, especially when Mars is posited there.
Well, I guess hopefully we'll find out. I don't feel it was self-defense. My feel is a police officer chose to shoot the guy.
Yeah,
for whatever reason. But Stephen, it's interesting that you were mentioning Scorpio, because I progressed the natal chart for the town for Ferguson to the time of the shooting. So we've got the progressed planets and the transiting planets, and it's a really volatile dynamic. So the moon was progressed to 12 degrees of Capricorn, and Pluto, the modern planet of death and the planet of crime, was at 11 degrees Capricorn, therefore conjunct the moon, again indicating something unfortunate for the public. And I think the uprising, the demonstrations by members of the public are also described by and triggered by this Pluto moon conjunction, because Pluto is, authorities, and you've got this general public objection to the authorities, and particularly a crime committed by the authorities, Pluto. But what's even more interesting is that the progressed Mars in this chart, planet of violence, is now conjunct the natal Pluto. So that's definitely something that would trigger a crime, a tragedy, an act of violence. But then when you look at the cluster, because the town actually has 5 planets in Scorpio.
Yeah.
The Sun, Venus, Uranus, Mercury, and Saturn. And transiting Saturn, the major malefic, was conjunct Uranus at the time of the shooting. That's a sudden or unexpected crime or a tragedy. But then also you see we've got that transiting Mars, which is as well as triggering the eclipse point on top of Mercury in Scorpio in this natal chart, it's conjunct the progressed Saturn at 6 degrees Scorpio. So it's a pretty tragic and very, very challenging chart. It certainly does describe what's going on in that town in Missouri.
Yes, it does. That's one thing I love about progressions, is because they're excellent as timing devices. First of all, we can't really, how can we miss that grouping of planets in Scorpio in the town's chart? That right there is almost setting up an event. It's saying, because we notice also that Saturn is having the town is having a Saturn return also. So what we see here probably is a judgment for past racism, a judgment. Now, when I say judgment, I don't mean in the legalistic sense. I mean maybe more in the theological sense, a cosmological sense, a judgment for failing to rein in racism and discriminatory practices, and even illegal, violent practices to the town, to the residents, or the black residents specifically of that town. Transiting Mars, in addition to interacting with the eclipse point, also has just conjuncted the progressed Saturn. It looks like in the town's chart, it looks like Saturn has progressed to 6 Scorpio. Was he retrograde? No. He in the founding chart he was at 1 degree Scorpio. Fine. So he progressed a little bit there, and Saturn is just so heavily emphasized in this chart that we would expect a Saturnine experience, like a murder, to occur. Pisces is also emphasized as well in the founding chart for this for the town. There are no planets in Pisces. Really, the node is there, but the solar arc directions, which is another sort of progression technique. It has Saturn in Pisces, Mercury in Pisces, Uranus in Pisces, and also the ascendant in Gemini, which is conjunct the progressed Mars, which is also conjunct the natal Pluto. So that is tying that moment really to the body of the town. So yeah, was it written into the sort of the founding principles? Was it baked right into the essence of this town, this event? Absolutely, it was. It certainly was, Steve.
Yeah. It's really, really interesting. I'm very much looking forward to us being able to analyse Michael Brown's chart and, if we can, pulling Darren Wilson, the COPS chart, into the picture. Should we take a look, Stephen, at this in the context of the US chart?
That's a great idea.
Well, it was your idea, actually, because before the show you said, you were looking at the US chart as well, the Sibley chart. So just for our listeners, be aware that there are a number of charts for the US. Sibley chart, which has Sagittarius rising, is a very popular chart. Stephen and I look at others as well. Particularly, I'm very interested in the Gemini rising chart. But it was your idea, Stephen, and I think it's a great idea. What should we do first? Should we if we progress the US Sibley chart to the time of this killing in Ferguson, and then overlay we could progress the US chart and then put the transits in as well.
Okay.
And then we could look at pulling in the Ferguson town chart into the picture. So we could progress the US chart and the Ferguson chart, pull it together into a quinquay wheel, so 5 wheels, and see what that shows us, because I'm sure it'll show that the spotlight was on Ferguson even in the US chart at that time.
Without a doubt, there probably will be a huge congruence between the Sibley chart and the events of August the 9th. And we've already talked a little bit about how the United States 6th house interacts with these event charts. They fall into the angles not only for this event chart, but also for the event charts of other racist acts, other police brutality acts, such as the beating of Rodney King, and the Trayvon Martin shooting, etc.
Yes, and it would be interesting to look at some of those event charts side by side, along with the event chart for the shooting of Michael Brown, just to see if there are any, if the stars, if the planets are pointing at anything in particular, or bringing anything in particular to our attention as a comparison between these different event charts.
Oh yeah, first of all, I would say that, we talked about Venus in Cancer. I would definitely say that's significant as well. That's a pinch point, as it were. But simply by being in the same sign, that to me is a delineation match for the racist element, the racist dimension that seems to be vital and inseparable from all of these shootings and incidents.
Absolutely. Stephen, I've just progressed the chart, and what I'm drawn to immediately is that so I just want to make sure you've got the same in your chart, but the progressed Sibley chart shows the progressed moon, the common people, in the US chart also at 11 degrees Scorpio.
Yeah,
that same point.
It's impossible to deny. The progressed moon for the United States is.
Have you got it at 11 degrees Scorpio, as I have?
I do. It's conjunct.
It's just unbelievable. So it's exactly conjunct that point in the Mercury in the Ferguson natal chart. Then.
Yes, it is.
It's crazy.
It's conjunct to Mars.
Yeah.
It's conjunct to Mars.
So I didn't realize. I didn't realize this because we hadn't sort of pulled it together and looked at it this way. So that's so the US chart, even the US chart, disregard the Ferguson chart for a moment. The progressed US chart with the transits because of Moon at 11 degrees Scorpio, the eclipse point, now stimulated at the time of the event by Mars at 8 degrees Scorpio, says tragedy for the common people and quite probably some form of uprising.
Yep.
Wow.
It's it's really amazing the congruity between, these mundane charts of all kinds and, the national chart. When you see that, it's just, for one thing, it's just a stunning confirmation of the validity of astrology.
Mm-hmm. It can't be. I don't know how it can be denied. I just don't understand how in this day and age it's denied. It's so rigorous. It's methodical. It's undeniable. But Stephen, also when you progress the US chart for the event, the time of this shooting in Ferguson, the North node in the US chart is conjunct Mercury at 24 degrees Cancer, and what was transiting that point? Venus in Cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And you were saying that you consider, and we've got the south node of the Moon, the transiting south node of the Moon, conjunct the part of death in the US chart, the natal part of death, and the progressed Venus. So I think you're really onto something with this Venus theme in the US chart.
Yeah, it's and it's not my idea. There's an excellent book written about the rectification of the American birth figure. I don't know the guy's name. He doesn't list it. He's probably of some status in society and doesn't want to make himself known. But the book is a rectification manual. It's an excellent, outstanding book, and in it he delineates quite thoroughly all of the planets in the United States American figure, and he's the one who deserves the credit for making that association, for making that linkage, and he did it using medieval or traditional techniques. That's the amazing thing. So, and to have that Venus simulating or symbolizing racism, so prominent in the event chart is it shows the inner dynamics, the underlying dimension, the things behind the scenes motivating this event, the things that were bigger than both Wilson and Mr. Brown.
It's incredible. I'm just blown away by the synchronization in the progressed US chart and the shooting chart.
Yeah.
Sometimes it does leave you pretty much speechless.
It's because you're like, where to begin? There's so many points of convergence. It all goes back to the idea that these things were encoded into the original Sibley chart of America.
Yes. It brings you to the point that everything that happens was somehow encoded into our solar system. Everything that happens.
That's what the entire system rests on. The whole idea that there's a cycle, the position of the cycle is preordained. The position of a conjunction is preordained ever since the Big Bang. Ever since the Big Bang put matter into motion, the position of the planets they were foretold, and this is all mathematical, really. And in my way, I tend to think of it as God's way of God's way of automating things. Astrology as an automation system is quite robust and powerful. If you look at it that way, I mean, why would a creator or a divine being want to be concerned with me individually when he can set up this incredibly complex system to automate things? You know what I mean? Wouldn't that make sense? I mean, if we give the creator, a little bit of credit for being halfway bright. I mean, that's how we would do it, isn't it?
Well, brighter than the police in Ferguson, that's for sure.
Yeah, I know. But
it's just unbelievable.
That's why there's such a congruence there, and you know, the planets, the progressed motion, the secondary motion, the primary, all of these complex motions of the planet, they're timers, they're minute hands, second hands, or as John Addy would put it, the wards in the combination lock, and when they click into place, an actual event happens. And this event on August the 9th, the fact that Wilson would shoot Brown, that event was encoded into the Sibley chart. It really was.
Well, let's actually. Oh, I was going to say let's pull Michael Brown's picture into it, but we can't yet because I bet you if you also pulled in his natal and progress charts, the eclipse would be significant there. The triggering of the eclipse, that point at 11 degrees Scorpio, would be significant in Brown's chart as well. So not only would you see in the progressed US chart, Sibley chart, this dynamic, also in the Ferguson chart, but at the same point, that's where you see them coming together and pointing to the event. Then if you added Michael Brown's chart and Darren Wilson's chart, they would be very clearly part of the whole picture.
They would. And in fact, there's actual terminology for it. It's called riding the mundane wave. You know, it's an idea that those people whose natal charts enjoy this convergence, if enjoy is the word to be used, this convergence with the national chart of any nation, these are the people who are going to be the leaders. These are going to be the people who will be the titans of enterprise, the murder victims, the murderers, the big business guys, the celebrities, etc. They're going to crystallize the collective wishes. If anybody listening takes away anything from this radio broadcast, I want it to be this: that both Michael Brown and Darren Wilson are crystallizing and manifesting the wishes, the desires of the collective. Both of them are.
Oh, for sure. They are almost puppets on the stage, aren't they?
They're actors on a stage.
National or global theatre. They playing a role in this whole dynamic and the fact that we need to think about the militarization of the police. We need to think about whether this can happen again. We need to think about the racial issues as well. So they really are.
Yeah,
puppets in the puppet show, I guess.
Well, if you think about the militarization of the police as a natural extension of the Patriot Act, as a natural extension of the increased domain that the NSA has to abrogate private conversations to themselves, it seems, obviously it looks like it's the thing to do. Apparently it's some terrible direction that we're going in here. I would expect probably to see more of it. I would expect eventually to see cops with drones. They already kidnap.
They're already using them, aren't
they? Drone technology I think is fairly widely available and probably even available to civilians for that matter. So but we have to.
So assume we'll have black people being shot by drones.
We'll have plenty of white people being shot by drones too. Police brutality certainly isn't. It's a black cause for a reason because they're overwhelmingly victimized by it. But normal Joes like me and you, that's why we white people should be concerned as well because it's only a matter of time before the Gestapo comes kicking down your door, buddy.
Scary stuff.
Well, we have to decide how much policing we need. We have to decide how much security we need, how much we're going to tolerate. Maybe one day we'll decide to fight crime through organized social means instead of through punitive measures. In other words, maybe we won't even have in future societies, ideal societies. Maybe we won't even have to punish. Maybe we'll get to a level where we can police ourselves. But you know what? I doubt that's going to happen. I think it's interesting, or at least pertinent, to examine the chart for the Rodney King acquittal, because that acquittal, it sparked a race riot that required the intervention of a division of Marines, United States Marines. You want to talk about militarization of the police? How would you like to have an entire division of Marines tromping through your neighborhood? So during a period in the early 90s, Los Angeles, for a time there, looked like certain districts of modern Kabul. It was terrible. Now, we had a similar event happen with the Trayvon Martin case, where George Zimmerman was acquitted of that, and so there's always the possibility. God forbid. I mean, we have to steel ourselves for the possibility. We've already had a precedent here, haven't we? We've already had the Rodney King case where brutal police were acquitted. We already have the George Zimmerman case, and we probably have a whole encyclopedia full of other cases where police brutality was excused and the assailants acquitted. So we would not be beyond the reason. We would not be insane to worry and fear for an irrational acquittal of Darren Wilson for this matter. And so it bears thinking about what would be the consequences. We've already seen the moon for this event chart is irascible. It's in Aquarius. It's in contact with that nasty Saturn-Mars grouping we talked about. So the people and the police are locked into this square, this 90-degree angle, this square between the moon and Mars, Saturn. So the potential is definitely there. The square between the moon and Mars in this event chart for Ferguson, that square is applying. I better double check myself. I want to say it's applying. But at any rate, to have that square there in the first place indicates that, and yes, it is indeed applying. That makes me fear, Steve, that violent events are going to actually increase, that we're not done yet seeing protesters being brutalized, journalists, in fact. The Mercury combusts the sun in Leo is also a pretty good symbol for all the journalists who are finding out what it's like to report on the news in Ferguson, Missouri. Getting arrested, in other words. So way to go, Ferguson. Keep on arresting the journalists, and why not arrest some nuns and some priests while you're at it? You know what? Tase them. Why the hell not? Might as well. But at any rate.
We had a nun arrested in Knoxville for protesting at the nuclear.
Well, why not waterboard her? What the hell? Waterboard her.
She's in prison.
In prison? Prison's not good enough. Senator Gitmo. Jesus Christ. I mean, come on. She's a nun, for crying out loud. I mean,
she's in her 80s, I think, or her 90s.
She's not a threat to anyone. Whoever arrested that nun ought to be ashamed of themselves. But, it just goes to show the law. There's a difference between legality and morality. Our laws are not moral. They're not designed to be moral necessarily. It would be nice if they can be moral, but that's not what they're really designed to do. A lot of times the law is not moral, unfortunately. I mean, any child will tell you it's immoral to arrest an 80-year-old nun, unless she cannibalized your neighbor, for Christ's sake. And I doubt that this little old lady did that. I mean, if you arrest a nun, you flirt with hellfire. Jesus. I kick ass for the Lord.
She was protesting about the nuclear facility, the nuclear site or complex, Oak Ridge. So she actually broke in through the perimeter.
Say what?
She broke through the wire fence.
Oh no wonder.
And there was a big because they didn't really spot this happening and seemed to do much about it before she got right up to the building. And so the question is, well, what if the terrorist had just waltzed in, just clipped the fence and waltzed in?
Yeah.
And how on earth could anybody get that close? So it caused this huge storm and controversy about how easy it is just to clip the fence and stroll up to the building.
I bet it did.
But yeah, she's in prison. She's in prison.
Well, you're okay. Great. You guys just got compromised by an 80-year-old nun. What WTF is wrong with you people? I mean, what kind of security is that?
Yes, it makes you laugh, doesn't it? Because you can you can clip the fence of a nuclear complex in the United States, and you can walk right up to the building.
Yeah,
But woe betide if you're walking in the middle of the street and you're black.
Yeah. I mean, it is kind of sobering actually to consider the fact that she did infiltrate a nuclear facility. That's definitely a bit of a party pooper. That'll wipe the smile off your face. Yeah, now that hits me, yeah, for sure. That's pretty disturbing to think that someone could just do that to a nuclear power facility. Well, at any rate, we were going to talk about old Rodney King there. That's a name we haven't heard for a while. Mr. King has passed into spirit now, so we'll try not to malign the dead. But in the 90s, I was alive.
Are we looking at his event chart or acquittal chart first?
You know, I would like to look at his acquittal chart because I'll tell you what, Steve, I tend to think that one would symbolize the onset of the race riots.
Yes.
And so in a question of, hey, you know, does this drama down in Ferguson, does this terrible business down there, will it spark, the question to my thinking is, will it spark more violent riots? Will it spark race riots and things of that nature? And in order for, you know, I think a reasonable starting point to judge that would be to look at the event chart for the acquittal of the Rodney King police officers. And the data for that is,
April, you gave it to me before, April 29th, 1992.
Right, yes.
Simi Valley, California, and we used 12 p.m. PDT.
I don't know what time the actual proceedings were, so, you know, unfortunately we kind of have to disregard the angles and just focus on the planets and the signs and see how they all wash up. And you know, it's interesting to see what transits were happening at that time, what those transits they represent, what the current divine ideas are, you know. And so we see a grouping of planets in Aries, you know, and that's very appropriate for an incipient race riot, I would say. Have the Moon, Mercury, Venus in Aries, Mars about to enter in Aries, even though by the time he gets there, but Mars's ingress into Aries would be more consistent with the Marines entering into Los Angeles and imposing order. Do you see? Because Mars in Aries is good.
The other thing, Stephen, in this one is that the Moon is in the bends of the lunar nodes.
Yes.
The Moon at 4 degrees Aries at midday. So it would have been in the bends for the majority of the day, or certainly the working day, when the acquittal was announced. So it was an unfortunate event for the general public, the seeming lack of justice. And then you've got the Moon in Aries, which I think also describes the reaction of the general public.
Very adequately so. Now, Aries, you know, when you switch between house systems, you know, as everyone knows by now, all of our millions of listeners, I switch between 2 house systems, and doing that will put Aries on the 4th house cusp. And in fact, I do believe in the modern house systems, Aries would be on the 4th house cusp of the Sibley chart. So that, you know, to have the Moon in Aries in the 4th house like this, the symbolism here says civil disruption in the homeland. You know, 4th house being homeland, Mars and Aries representing a civil disturbance, an agitated people on the verge of violence. You know, we noticed that the Moon in Aries is square to America's Jupiter and Venus and Cancer. We can't forget the racial characteristics of this riot. And it's no coincidence. I've been talking this whole time. We've been discussing Venus and Cancer as representing racism for America. Venus at 3 degrees 9 minutes of Cancer representing racism for America. So it's no coincidence that at the acquittal of these police officers, the Moon was at 4 degrees 4 minutes of Aries, is in square to America's Venus in Cancer. Do you see? So this is a very tight...
The natal.
Right.
It's square to the natal.
Right.
The Sibley chart, yeah, okay.
Right. So
did you progress the US chart as well to the time of the acquittal or not?
No, I did not try that, Steve. Did you want to give that a shot and see what you noticed?
Yeah, because I think it was incredibly revealing when we did it for the shooting of Michael Brown. It would be interesting to see how it looks at the time of the Rodney King acquittal.
That sounds great.
So let's progress it. So it's April 29th, 92.
Right. While you're doing that, I'll just, for those who aren't sure what the technique of progressions is, I'll just explain that in most astrological movement of the planet, we're talking about one type of movement that derived from the Earth's rotation. You know, we see the planets going from east to west. But however, the planets themselves, their own motion through the zodiac, through the universe, that's called the secondary motion. And that motion is what we measure with secondary progressions as well. And as Forrest Gump once famously said, that's all I have to say about that.
Well,
Quintessentially American guy.
Let's see what it looks like when we pull in the progressed Sibley chart. What have we got here? Let's see. Oh, Saturn, transiting Saturn conjunct the progressed Sun.
Oh, that's go. Any transit of any kind of Saturn over the Sun of a chart is going to represent a dark moment for the president of the leadership of any country.
Mhm. Well, there it was. Saturn in Aquarius was at 17 degrees, conjunct the progressed Sun in the Sibley chart, which also was at 17 degrees of Aquarius. What else have we got? Let's have a look. And we've got transiting Mars opposing progressed Neptune in the US chart. So I think that describes the shock and disappointment, disillusionment. Would you agree?
Yes, I would. I would say that's a very good delineation match for that.
Oh, this is perfect. This is perfect. To your point about Venus, this Venus theme, Venus and racism or racial issues, well, Venus is at 3 degrees Cancer in the Sibley chart, the natal chart. The transiting south node of the moon was at 3 degrees Cancer at the time of the acquittal.
Okay. See, so that, I mean, it's no accident that we've been talking about Venus's connection to racism this whole time, and that these events time out exactly to important movements across Venus. This goes beyond coincidence. If you ask me, Steve, what would you say? I mean, things like this is what convinces me. This is what I mean when I say that the system is internally consistent. By system, I mean the natal chart in itself, because that's exactly what it is. It's a system, and it interacts with things that are outside the system, the transiting planets. But you can also manipulate the system itself through profections and get meaningful information from it. So it's incredibly complex, arguably alive, seeing that it is indeed a system. One author, what was his name? Charles Harvey, in fact, was his name. He likened the natal chart or any kind of horoscope. He called it an algebraic interface. And really, that I could not describe it any better than Charles Harvey did in Mundane Astrology. The horoscope is an algebraic interface, algebraic in the sense that it accepts variables and other data inputs, and an interface in that it allows us to communicate with the divine, with intelligence that is deeper and bigger and more far-reaching than our own. An organizing principle, as it were. Now, in addition to progressions, another very important technique that would really be interesting to do right now is for the town of Ferguson, is to look at its natal ascendant ruler, which is hold on, let me pull up let's if you don't mind, Steve, I'd like to go back to the town chart real fast. The Ferguson founding chart. And we have Aquarius rising right there. Now, Aquarius is the sign of old ideas. So that right there is a delineation match for racist municipality. You know what I'm saying? You following me there, Steve?
Yes, yeah. It's just making me also realize that this whole cluster of planets in Scorpio that were triggered in Ferguson at the time of the Michael Brown shooting, we said that transiting Saturn was at 16 degrees and therefore conjunct Uranus, which describes the uprising, the people showing their anger, their disgust.
Let me tell you something.
But also that Uranus is the ruler of the ascendant, so which makes it even more significant.
When a planet's in the sign, for example, the Sun, I think it would be safe to assume that the Sun is the of Ferguson, perhaps the police chief, the elected, the upper class, the bigwigs. It's the bigwig. The Sun in Scorpio, at 27 degrees of Scorpio, as soon as a planet enters its sign, that planet is aware of it. In other words, as soon as Mars ingressed into Scorpio, the Sun the leadership of Ferguson, Missouri, was aware of it. And so were all the other planets. There would have been, it probably would have been felt like an atmosphere of irritation, an atmosphere of conflict. Do you see? And furthermore, all the other planets would have felt it. Mercury in Scorpio retrograde would feel immediately as soon as any planet enters into Scorpio. So whatever Mercury in Scorpio represents in Ferguson, which would probably be the media apparatus there, the papers, would represent whatever literati exist in Ferguson. Although I don't. Let me just stop there. I was going to say anyway. It would represent the literati of Ferguson. Sorry. It's just such an oxymoron. Literati of Ferguson. At any rate, it would represent the intellectual establishment of Ferguson, Missouri, which would need some work because they're not keeping in tabs of their police very well. That's why I laugh at the phrase literati of Ferguson. But my point is that all of these entities would be aware of any planet as soon as it gets into Scorpio. It would descend like an atmosphere, like a pall upon the planet. You know what I mean? You there, Steve?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, okay. Now, it would be felt worse. The worst moments are going to be when the ascendant ruler transits over the malefics. So, here we have an ascendant ruler who is a malefic, Saturn. Well, what we want to know is, hey, when is Saturn going to transit over 21 degrees Aries? Those will probably be pretty bad moments in the history of the town of Ferguson. Fortunately, we got a lot of time before that happens. So Saturn now is in Scorpio, so when he gets into Aries again, it's going to be years down the road. But without a doubt, the town of Ferguson, once the ascendant ruler Saturn transits over 21 degrees, 22 minutes of Aries, which is Mars' position in Ferguson's town chart, there's going to be an event that's, terrible for not deathly. It's not going to mean the end of Ferguson, but it's going to probably be violent, probably be along the same old lines of what we're talking about here. Though maybe not so public. Although I dare say Ferguson is in the limelight now. I doubt it will ever be able to retire to its former status of a bucolic, rustic existence. That's over with now.
It's just going to be very interesting to see how this situation unfolds. I think, as you said, to consider whether there will be more demonstrations by people. I'm sure that there will be, but also to see the course of justice, or hopefully the course of justice.
Well, the citizenry of Ferguson are represented by the moon at 23 degrees of Leo. Now, at 23 degrees Leo, that's in the terms of Mercury. They're in the area of Mercury. Mercury Leo is going to be going to talk a lot of bluster. It's going to be blusterous. Mercury Leo is going to love the movies. Mercury is writing and Leo is fame in the movies. So having the people in the term of Mercury is going to render the citizenry of Ferguson. It's going to make them. Pretty much love the Hollywood culture. Really, it's probably the movie theaters are probably going to be, one of the only things to do in Ferguson that might even be remotely entertaining. And even now, Mercury in Leo combined with the moon in Leo, and again, Mercury is term ruler here. Mercury isn't exactly posited in Leo, but let's not forget that Mercury is the symbol of Michael Brown. So to have the moon of the founding chart of Ferguson in 1840, I can't see the day, 49, 46 or whatever, to have the moon in the terms of Mercury is a symbol of the people's involvement with Michael Brown, Steve. That's my argument right there. The moon at 23 degrees of Leo in the terms of Mercury, an astrological shorthand for the citizenry's responsibility. Michael Brown shoot.
Yeah, and I didn't think of that actually. That the Mercury that was conjunct the November the 3rd eclipse represents the youth.
Oh yeah, as universal.
So it does represent him.
As universal significator, Mercury is going to represent the slain youth in both the Trayvon Martin chart and the Michael Brown chart. Now, and it's that's also important because in both charts Mercury is debilitated. So and yeah, there are definitely going to be symbols for them. And so to have the moon in Leo in the terms of Mercury and also in the 7th house, wow, that shows that the citizenry, the Leo is all about honor and the defense of honor and hoarding glory. So this shows the citizenry who are inclined to do that, and not just males, but also the females. And this is very important because I'm gonna tell you something. If you mess with a family, for example, if your dog bites a kid, it's the father that you want to deal with, not the mother. The mother's going to be like, the only thing that's going to fix this is your head on a pike. You know what I'm saying? So to have the maternal instinct in Leo, we're talking about a mother lioness there. Do you see what I mean? And Cancer, that's fairly Cancerian too. We have to look at the moon as a symbol for Cancer. The sign is an extension of the planet, and the planet is an extension of its sign that it rules. We're talking about here. So to have what we're looking at essentially is a mixture of the energies of Cancer with the energies of Leo. That's what we're talking about. And Cancer, when it's militarized like this in fire signs or by having fiery planets in it, Cancer becomes extremely reactive, extremely paranoid and cruel in its self-defensive reactions. It goes overboard, well overboard. You see, that's part of the problem with the American Venus at 3 degrees of Cancer. She's in the terms of Mars. Do you see what I mean? So that's like having a conjunction of Venus and Mars in Cancer, and Mars in Cancer is the quintessence of extremely cruel, overcompensating violence to protect oneself, or even if the protection is not necessary, it could be an overreaction or the result of complete paranoia. That doesn't matter. But the point is this: Mars in Cancer manifests as cowardice, unless it's backed into a corner or feels threatened, and then it reacts with extraordinary cruelty. And this is the environment that Venus in the American natal chart is in that degree of Cancer, 3 degrees of Cancer. Do you see? This is what led Dr. H, the pseudo-epigraphical author of the Rectification Manual, to label Venus as a symbol of American racism, Venus in Cancer. In addition to my comments earlier about Cancer representing the color white and Venus representing love, quite bluntly, a love of the color white. And it represents other things, too, that have nothing to do with racism, such as, for example, with Venus being representing love and Cancer representing consumption in general. Venus in Cancer is a complete hit for love of consumption, a consumerist society that we live in. So this is how astrology works.
Love of home as well.
Love of home, Martha Stewart.
And also, we need to remember that Venus in the natal chart, the US natal chart at 3 degrees Cancer, is conjunct Jupiter in Cancer, right, and the Sun in Cancer, and right, the part of Fortune in Cancer, and Mercury in Cancer. So love of home, absolutely, love of the homeland, adoration of the homeland, and indulgence of the homeland is definitely a hallmark of this chart.
Look what happened to the person who was the archetypal embodiment of the Venusian love of the home, Martha Stewart. They sent her to prison. You see what I mean? This is what happens when there are Venus problems. You see, this is Venus manifesting in an illegal way. Martha Stewart, this is Venus conjunct Jupiter. You see, this is a debilitated week in Venus. Martha Stewart is the absolute embodiment. She is the very soul of what it means to be an American hostess, and she also did a bit of inside trading and was punished for that. And so this is the sort of richness that astrological symbolism is capable of, because it will represent racism on the one hand, and it also is capable of representing financial fraud on the other, financial crime on the other, and consumerism, and a whole bunch of other things of that sort. So it's one of the most powerful tools for forecasting events, trends, anything really. And I might add, what we're doing now, Steve, has always been traditionally, at least in the ancient world, in the medieval times, totally accepted by the church. because we're doing what they called natural astrology. Whereas if we were actually answering a question and doing a horary chart, that would have a divinatory purpose. That would be judicial astrology, and the church would be critical of that. But natural astrology, what we're doing here, has long been.
Well, it's interesting though that the mundane astrology was acceptable, or certainly more acceptable, and it's mundane astrology that would have provided insight to leaders like kings and the Pope.
Right.
So it was surely very, very useful to them. So they say that Queen Elizabeth was very keenly advised by her astrologer at the time of the Spanish Armada, and that they knew that the Spanish Armada would get caught up in a storm. So what serves the ruling class, mundane astrology was permitted, and what would serve potentially the ruled was not permitted, natal astrology. But my theory, Stephen, is that the church and the monarchy, the monarchs, outlawed astrology and metaphysics more generally because it gives people access to the truth.
Right.
And it gives people access to the past, the present, and the future. It's extremely powerful, extremely accurate. And if you give everybody all of that information, then you lose a huge amount of control and power.
Exactly.
So it was outlawed, it was banned, because you can't control people if they have all the information and knowledge that you have.
There's a pretty good reason why eclipses would have sort of gotten a bad reputation. In the days of Rome, in Roman astrology, the powers that be would get the natal charts of they would use astrology to discover their competitor, who would be their biggest competitors. And then the emperor would simply have that person executed, and this satisfied the people's expectation that, the deaths of important men would befall the occurrence of an eclipse. This fed into that, but the Romans were incredibly draconian, and they totally used their astrology for the wrong purposes. I mean, they would be sanctioned by every ethical body of astrologers in the modern world. And in Asia, there's also a lot of sanctioned astrology in the government. In fact, many Southeast Asian governments routinely use astrology for such things even as the construction of roads. We wouldn't want a situation where we have dueling astrologers, as it were. That could be bad. We don't want astrologers directing Nazis or the bad guys, because can you imagine?
But they did.
They did. There were times when they did. I don't think astrologers were directing Hitler based upon the charts of certain battles, because if they were really, really bad astrologers. When he launched his two-front war with Russia, for example, he was under the influence of some really gnarly astrological energy, and any reputable astrologer would have said, "Meine Führer, nein." Nick here.
Oh, I don't think that's something you would say to Hitler.
Well, this is the thing. The astrologer, in a way, has the power of the king.
Oh, but you know who did constantly consult an astrologer? Himmler.
Himmler did, absolutely. A lot of the Nazis did. Hess was famous for now, because of Rudolf Hess's actions, he thought that that astrology betokened a peace between Britain and Germany, and he defected to Britain in order to make that happen. And he, as a result, Hitler started throwing astrologers in concentration camps, and only one astrologer died in those concentration camps. So it's not like we can lay claim to being oppressed by the Nazis. No, but still, in fact, the Allies were consulting astrologers too, but only to see what the astrologers might be telling Hitler. You see, they used astrology as a tool for propaganda. They would drop leaflets of astrological forecasts, for example, that said, today's a bad day to go to the front if your commander is a Taurus or whatnot, things like that. And it was all essentially, astrology interacts with politics. Now, right now, I don't think we're at the time in the season yet for it to make much of an impact on the political machinery here. Because look at 9/11, for example. They received all sorts of warnings. The NSA received warnings. The CIA received warnings. The FBI received warnings. Dozens of warnings about what happened on 9/11, and that wasn't enough to prevent 9/11. How much more effective are two astrologers going to be?
Well, I'm not convinced that. I'm convinced that the powers that be did know about 9/11, but not necessarily per your suggestion or your point.
Well, you know what? That should be a show that we touch on one of these days. The 9/11. Of course, we're going to talk about a whole bunch of terrible public massacres.
We must look at 9/11. It's true.
We will look at 9/11.
And we do. Another show that I really want us to do is the show that we discussed, looking at economic crises or economic downturns and the U.S. chart as well as the Fed's chart.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
To say, is there a correlation? Well, we know there is a correlation, but is there a trend in the correlation? So that we can say, well, when these dynamics come together, you get an economic downturn. Again, that's something that we have to look at in detail for the book. Yeah. But it would be a great show as well.
There are many astrologers who make a very, very good living playing the markets using astrology, and so A, it's quite feasible to do so, and B, even if you're 80% accurate, you're probably going to do fairly well. And I submit that 80% accuracy is a very, very good standard to shoot for. We'll never be able to reach 100% accuracy here, folks. Even in a perfect world, that's just not possible. In all that we do here, and this is just my opinion. Steve may disagree with me. If as long as we reach 80% accuracy, then for myself, I personally will feel satisfied that we're doing a good job, and I would consider that to be fairly reliably accurate. I would be happy with that sort of statistic, Steve.
Oh yes, 80% accuracy would be good, as long as you gamble only a small amount for the 20% of the time you lose.
Right. You definitely have to sometimes, because it doesn't matter. I mean, sometimes everything that your carefully crafted judgment is going to be wrong. All of the high are going to not manifest. Those things, they happen sometimes. I mean, they're inexplicable. This is, I'm still learning a lot myself. I'll probably be learning this profession when I'm an 80-year-old man, Steve. It's mysterious, and I'm always uncovering new nooks and crannies to dig into.
Oh, it's true. It's just incredibly fascinating, and I'm sure when we get to Spirit, we'll be able to say, okay, we've done the apprenticeship on Earth. Give us the good stuff.
Well, I think personally, I think my soul is actually evolving away from the priestly class, Steve. I think this is one of my final incarnations in the priestly class. I think that in my next incarnations, I'm going to be in a more, perhaps maybe doing a more bureaucratic thing. That's what my chart seems to be pointing at. So I think the evolution of my spirit has been groomed for, I think, a responsible dispensation of governance. That's because of mainly the dynamics of the sign of Leo, quite frankly. Yeah. Leo, we Leos, we're something else. We don't mind admitting it either.
Well, I've got a lot of Aquarius, so I'll be saying, hey, I want to know the weird stuff.
Well, Aquarius, you guys are information sponges. Aquarius just is like sucks in data. Just it hoards it. In fact, you know what I'm saying? It just pulls it right on in. And it's really a lovely sign. And I've had to condition myself to start thinking of Aquarius more along the line in a more aquatic way, Steve. You know what I'm saying? Aquarius has a definite watery feel to it. I mean, going back as far as Manilius, into the mists of time, they've noted that they've associated Aquarius with things like canals, ditches, waterworks, the engineering of water, things of that, hydrology, things of that nature. So, I have to get accustomed to thinking of Aquarius in maritime terms a little bit here, But we're coming to the we're coming to the end stretches here, and what I don't want to say I hope you guys have enjoyed this show. This is because of the somber subject matter, but I do hope that we've managed to shed some light on why America perhaps is so racist, because they're operating on a cosmic script that is unspooling itself now, and it has been unspooling itself since the dawn of our nation's history, and it'll probably continue to do so.
There's racism in all countries, Stephen. There is. I know that there's racism in the UK. What has surprised me at times in the United States is that there are people that are church-going that are seemingly very respectable, but behind closed doors, some of them are very or outrageously racist. And I have two neighbors, a white couple, perfectly manicured yard. They're always well dressed, well presented. They're very religious. Bible study group meet at their home, etc., etc. But I was horrified when I was invited to dinner at their house, and I was horrified by how blatantly racist they are.
Yeah.
And I never saw them again. I didn't want to. But I think my point is that it's underground.
Yeah, and it's going to be not so underground too at times. My argument is that there's a season for that as well, Steve. And if anybody takes anything at all away from this show, it would be that don't rest on your laurels, assuming that the current progress we're making is going to last. The pendulum can and will swing back the other way in some way, shape, or form, in the guise of black racism, or in the guise of more overt and public white racism, the likes of which we fortunately have not seen for a very long time. My point is for folks not to take for granted the current sign of the times that it's going to last. If anything, studying the stuff has taught me, it's that the atmosphere, the entire collective motivation for an epoch can change, so that a people can go from being quite progressive and enlightened to being Neanderthals. So we're not out of the woods yet. That's definitely what I want to say about that, and it's a warning that bears thinking about. And again, we're going to keep an eye on this for sure, and we're going to monitor for more police brutality as well. This is something that should be reported and discussed, Steve. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, for sure. And we must follow the developments in our weekly shows, the ones in which we focus just generally on what's happening in the world and looking at events from a metaphysical perspective, rather than doing a deep dive on a subject like we have today. So in our normal shows, we'll continue to check in on the developments with this Michael Brown story.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think I'm glad you supplied me with the data for the chart of Ferguson, because really I think that chart will actually be quite helpful when it comes to forecasting, Steve. I got it a little bit on the late side, but I'm sure that once we, for example, were to look at the profections, and I don't want to rush through it now. Really, let's see if I can compute the data in time. I'm just curious to know.
Did you know what I didn't? One thing I didn't do, Stephen, is I didn't look actually at the major progressed aspects for Ferguson, and it would be good to cover that as well.
Yes, it would. And
I just wanted to say real fast that the city of Ferguson is now in what's called a 12th house year. So without getting into a bunch of technical gobbledygook, the 12th house is, for lack of a better word, kind of a bad house. And that's where they're at this year. The entire year is under the influence of the 12th house. That's very, very, very fitting, I would say. What month is it? No, August. Isn't it? Their birthday is when, in November? Okay, so let's see, 12th August.
In November 19th, 1894.
Right. Okay, so this is October, November. Okay. Yeah, I just want to say, well, maybe in future shows we can do a little bit more forecasting as far as I'm curious about the fate of the town, but my efforts have been restricted to delineating and are kind of cloudy as for what the future is going to hold on this situation quite yet. So we'll update you guys about that as well. We've talked a lot about the underpinnings, the natal meanings of the chart, and everything like that. I'm going to do a little bit more forecasting on this work and do an update next week.
Yeah, they've got some quite challenging major progressed aspects that are in force involving Mercury, the youth. Just again, to remind our listeners, the major progressed aspects we use in Hermetic astrology to identify deep underlying energies that then get triggered by transits. So it's really a way of digging deep into the entity and understand what the energetic dynamics are. And the highlights seem to be these challenging progressions involving Mercury, youth, and also the strong progressed conjunction of Mars to Pluto.
Yes, that's quite stressful, and that would raise our antennae. And then going from that and seeing for this town that, hey, not only are you having a 12th house year, but when the event happened, having an 8th house month, to me that is quite substantial. That they were having an 8th house month in a 12th house year. That's just stacking badness upon badness. And it's like, to the way that I perceive astrology, is like a big neon arrow pointing to, the beginning of August as a pinch point, a crisis time for this town. Next month, actually from the period of August 19th to September 19th, that's going to be bad as well, because that's where we encounter that grouping of planets in Scorpio. Saturn's there, so that period's going to be bad for Ferguson as well.
Yeah, I mean, that Saturn in Scorpio is going to move up over progressed Uranus at 19 degrees, then natal Venus at 24 degrees Scorpio, then the Sun. So it's going to be rough for some time, isn't it? If you've got Saturn transiting over a cluster of planets like that in your chart, it's not an easy time.
No, not at all, especially considering how slowly Saturn moves. And, well, perhaps the only good thing about this, Steve, is that next year, for them, the year goes from November 19th until November 19th of the next year, because that's their birthday for the town. So this next year for them is going to be a first house year, and that's going to focus on a complete redefinition from the ground up, because it's a first house year. The first house questions and matters are going to dominate the town's focus that year. So if I were the sitting chiefs and mayors and bosses and administrators, I'd be quaking in my boots right now, because as of November the 19th, you probably will not have a job. There's going to be, being in the nature of a first house year, there's going to be a restructuring of the actual body of the town. That's going to be quite interesting to behold as well.
Wouldn't be surprising. Hey, Stephen, I wanted to ask you, I know that at the end of the show you generally handle the announcements and things.
That's right, I do.
I wanted to remind you to mention to people that we have a show coming up on another criminal.
That's right.
Dennis Nilsson show.
Oh, that's Dennis Nilsson, the British Jeffrey Dahmer. How can we forget about that? There's so many similarities between Nilsson and Dahmer. Nilsson kept his bodies close to him, and his body count was kind of through the roof there. The cops found like a bag with some remains in it, and so they're on the way. They're talking to Nilsson, and they're like, "Okay, well, how many is it? 1 or 2?" Nilsson's like, "Nah, it's 15."
and the cops are just flummoxed. So, absolutely fascinating psychology, and quite a dangerous criminal, Steve. Quite a dangerous criminal is Dennis Nilsen. We'll be looking at his astrology.
One of the reasons I asked you to mention it is because we know that in that show we go into huge depth, but we also know that our listeners seem to be very interested in the criminal analyses.
Yeah, I am too. I mean, I don't know, maybe it's a quirk of my personality, but maybe I'm a weird guy, but I'm interested in the malfunction of things. You know what I'm saying? I'm interested in the pathology. I'm interested in how things break down. Because, I mean, I mean well. My heart's in the right place. I mean, I'm a good guy. I want to fix the machine from breaking down. But I think, I'm very much in favor of the know thine enemy mentality. You know what I'm saying, Steve? And to that end, I really do spend a lot of time investigating the natal figures of a wide variety of miscreants, cult leaders, murderers, arsonists, sexual perverts. I think though, Stephen, that it's an interest of mine as well, and I think that the objective is proving the utility of astrology and of metaphysical insight more generally. There is a huge opportunity to prevent tragedy, to stop killers, etc. There is.
And that really drives my passion for that part of our work. And there is an organization that's very interested in the research work on James Holmes, the Aurora, Colorado shooter. So it seems that there is an acknowledgement that we can provide really useful information for criminal cases.
Yes, there is, and to that end, I highly recommend everyone pick up a copy of your book, Steve, Thinking Completely Outside the Box, that goes in depth, analyzes the Aurora, Colorado theater shooting from the perspective of analytic astrology. I've read it more than once. I've enjoyed it, learned from it as well. The book's divided into two sections. The first section gives a very useful primer and a sort of a crash course in the principles of astrology. And then the second part of the book goes into a delineation and analysis of the event itself. I highly recommend everybody visit StephenFrampton.com and pick it up, or go to Amazon.com and look it up under Thinking Completely Outside the Box. You'll find it there. And, James Egan Holmes is certainly, I don't want to say interesting, but worth a read. And, always come visit us on every Friday evening from 8 to 10 Eastern Standard Time. We're going to be talking about many, many more criminals because, I'm interested in how it works not only from an ex-post facto perspective, looking at events, looking at crimes after they happen. I'm also interested in looking at crimes in an ex-ante facto perspective, before they happen. So we're going to be examining cold cases, open investigations. We're going to, at some point here shortly, be talking about the Gilgo Beach / Long Island, New York serial killer or possible killers who are active up there. They've been using Long Island as their own personal mortuary, as an amateur mortuary now, ever since about roughly 1996. The cops have made no arrest, and so we figured, what the heck? Maybe they'll appreciate a shout out from the Dream Team over here. We're going to put our shoulders to the task and see if we can find anything that might help the authorities. And there will be a lot of other cases, cold cases that are unsolvable. Stimulate me, Steve. The Black Dahlia case, Jack the Ripper. All of these speculative and hypothetical narratives in criminology. Man, I can't get enough of them, man. I cut my teeth on them.
Talking about criminology, I need to talk with you about Gail St. John. She's a psychic that has these incredible sniffer dogs, and she finds bodies and helps to solve murder cases. We need to talk about her because she's in contact.
Yeah, horror area astrology is good for, in general, just finding or locating lost stuff, and that includes people. Missing people or corpses. The person might know their loved one's dead, but the killer never gave up the body. The killer might be holding out the location of the loved one's body of the as a bargaining chip to try to get off of death row. Well, horary can help with those sorts of things. It's a little, it's not 100%. We got to acknowledge its limitations right off the bat. But at this juncture, with these cases and desperate straits for a resolution, every little bit helps, Steve. And we are substantially more than that every little bit. What we're doing is, let's look at it from a psychological perspective. What we're doing, profiling these people, rivals, that of what's being accomplished at Quantico. But if we've got down to our last 30 seconds here, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to remind everyone, please visit Stephen Frampton at StephenFrampton.com. That's Stephen with a V. And visit me at thegingerpsychic.com. And by all means, visit us next Friday night. We will see you there. Have a great week, everyone.